The wildfires, we know that the
partners, it benefits everyone.
Like less confrontation.
In some parts, President Trump obviously
would respond if they do come in.
Healthcare funding and a possible national unity problem were all on the list. Then, on Monday, as premiers were arriving on the island, the White House announced a new round of tariff threats aimed at Canada.
What about these provincial booze bans? Will you order provinces to lift them? And the Prime Minister says, no, that at this point, yet that's a provincial responsibility. It is a
That announcement has reopened one of the most visible symbols of the trade fight between the two countries, the decision by most Canadian provinces to pull American alcohol from their government liquor shelves. So the question now sitting in front of the country is a simple one with complicated consequences. Does American whiskey, bourbon, wine, and beer go back on Canadian shelves, or does Canada prepare to push harder? I want to take you through what the premiers have actually said, what the Prime Minister has ruled out, and what remains genuinely unresolved. Let me begin with what changed. The premiers had already planned this gathering in Charlottetown as a working meeting stretched across 2 days. The timing was not built around Washington, it simply landed that way. The new tariff announcement from the White House arrived on Monday, essentially as the premiers were assembling, which meant the first substantive conversation of the meeting was not about the domestic file they had prepared for. It was about the United States. According to reporting from Charlottetown, the mood among the premiers can be summed up in a single word: defiance. That is the starting position, not the final one, and the difference between those two things matters a great deal over the coming weeks. Here is why the alcohol question became the flashpoint.
Retaliatory steps that if we get to a place 30 days from now and there's no agreement and Trump proceeds with these new tariffs, it will be time for Canadians to punch back.
When the earlier round of American tariffs took effect last year, provincial governments looked for a response they could deliver quickly and entirely on their own authority. In most of Canada, alcohol distribution runs through provincial liquor authorities, which means a provincial government can decide, more or less overnight, what does and does not appear on the shelf. Most provinces removed American-made alcohol from those stores. Ottawa did not need to be involved. There was no legislation, no lengthy process, and no negotiation. It was the fastest lever available, and provinces pulled it. The scale involved is what gave the move weight. In Ontario alone, the Provincial Liquor Authority, the LCBO, had been purchasing roughly $1 billion of American alcohol every year. That flow stopped. For American distillers, vintners, and brewers, Ontario was not a marginal market. It was one of the single largest buyers of its kind anywhere. That is the practical reason the booze bans have kept surfacing in this dispute long after they were introduced. They are one of the few Canadian measures with a clearly identifiable dollar figure attached and a clearly identifiable set of American businesses on the receiving end. So the obvious question after Monday's announcement was whether the provinces would soften. Ontario Premier Doug Ford was asked directly whether he was prepared to lift Ontario's ban in light of the new threats from Washington. His answer was no. Ford framed the situation in confrontational terms, saying Canada needs to stand up to what he called a bully and match Washington tariff for tariff across the board. That is his characterization of the situation and his preferred approach. It is a political position, clearly stated, and it tells you where Canada's largest provincial economy currently stands. British Columbia Premier David Eby was asked the same question and gave an answer that left even less room for interpretation. He said there is not a chance that American alcohol returns to shelves in his province, and he tied that stance to a broader argument about knowing what British Columbia stands for and who its friends are. Two premiers, two of the country's largest provinces, and no indication from either that the measure is under review. For anyone hoping the new tariff announcement might trigger a quiet Canadian climb down as a goodwill gesture, that is not what emerged from Charlottetown. What I want to highlight now is the part of this that goes beyond alcohol. Both Ford and Eby have signaled they are willing to consider going further. The framing described from Charlottetown is a 30-day horizon. If, roughly a month from now, there is no agreement with Washington and the new tariffs proceed as announced, those premiers argue Canada should respond in kind, dollar for dollar. Ford in particular has pushed that idea. It is important to be precise about status here. That is an argument being advanced by premiers. It is not a decision. No new Canadian retaliation package has been adopted, and the specific measures that would be involved have not been set out publicly. That distinction is worth pausing on, because the space between a premier statement and a government action is where this story will actually be decided. Trade retaliation of the kind being discussed generally involves federal authority over tariffs and border measures, while the provincial liquor decisions sit squarely with the provinces. So a premier calling for a dollar-for-dollar response is making a case, publicly, to Ottawa and to the country. Whether that case is accepted and what form any response would take has not been determined. The 30-day marker is a political expectation, not a legal deadline. Not every province is in the same place. Only 2 continue to sell American alcohol products: Alberta, under Premier Danielle Smith, and Saskatchewan, under Premier Scott Moe. Both have made clear they want a united Canadian front. Neither is arguing that Canada should simply accept whatever Washington proposes. Their emphasis is different. They have consistently pressed for less confrontation and more negotiation, arguing that diplomacy is the route most likely to produce a durable outcome. That has been their position since the earlier round of tariffs, and Monday's announcement has not changed it. Moe put the reasoning plainly. His argument is that the objective is not to layer counter tariffs on top of American tariffs and weaken the North American economy in the process.
Prime Minister Mark Carney and Canada's premiers are in Charlottetown today and tomorrow with a crowded agenda: wildfires, interprovincial trade, and...
The objective, in his framing, is to reach a renewed agreement. That is a genuine strategic disagreement inside the Canadian delegation, and it is not new. It reflects, in part, different provincial economies with different exposures to American markets and different views about which pressure points are worth using. The timing of that split is what makes it consequential. Canada's leverage in this dispute depends heavily on presenting a single position. When 2 provinces are visibly pursuing a softer approach while others are threatening to escalate, that complicates the message being sent south of the border. It also complicates the message being sent to Canadians, who are being asked to absorb the costs of a trade fight without a clear national consensus on how far it should go. None of the premiers has suggested the disagreement is a rupture. They continue to describe themselves as aligned on the goal. The division is about method. That brings us to the Prime Minister. Mark Carney was in Ottawa when the premiers began meeting, and he joined them by video conference to gather their first reactions to the new tariff threat.
This referendum about to happen in Alberta. In the meantime, there's going to be an election in Quebec. Right now, the Separatist Party in Quebec is leading in the polls, could form government with the intent.
Before that virtual meeting, he spoke to reporters and was asked whether he would direct the provinces to lift their alcohol bans. His answer was no. He described the liquor bans as a provincial responsibility and said the decision rests with each premier. That is a deliberate line. It leaves the measures in place without the federal government formally adopting them as national policy.
Provinces removed United States-made alcohol from provincial liquor stores, and provinces did that in response to illegal tariffs on...
There is a practical logic to that position, and it is worth explaining. By leaving the bans with the provinces, Ottawa keeps a source of pressure active while retaining flexibility at the negotiating table. The federal government is not the party that would have to reverse course if a deal materialized. 12 or 13 separate provincial and territorial decisions are harder for a counterpart to demand be undone in a single stroke.
C'est nécessaire d'avoir des conversations et les conversations de l'équipe commerciale, y compris M. Leblanc et puis Mme Charette, ils sont les gars.
Whether that was the intent has not been stated. What is confirmed is the Prime Minister's public position. He is not ordering anything lifted. On the substance of the negotiations, Carney has drawn a clearer line, and it is the most consequential thing to come out of the past 2 days. He has rejected the idea of sectoral agreements. That means he is not prepared to settle for a deal that covers steel alone, or that resolves the alcohol dispute alone, while leaving everything else unaddressed. His stated objective is a comprehensive, modernized version of the Canada-United States-Mexico Agreement, known in Canada as CUSMA. Anything narrower, in his framing, does not solve the underlying problem. Let me explain what that means in practical terms, because the word comprehensive is doing a lot of work there. A sectoral deal would remove the pressure from one industry while leaving others exposed, and it would leave the broader relationship unsettled and open to the next dispute. A renegotiated trade agreement, by contrast, would set the terms across sectors at once. It is a much larger undertaking, it takes considerably longer, and it requires the other parties to want the same thing. The Canadian position, as articulated by the Prime Minister and supported by most premiers, is that Canada is seeking a strong agreement, and that no agreement at all would be preferable to a mediocre or partial one. That is a significant statement of negotiating posture, and it carries risk in both directions. Holding out for a comprehensive deal means accepting that tariffs may remain in place for longer while talks continue. Accepting a partial deal would ease immediate pressure on some industries while leaving others uncovered. Canadian officials have not published a timeline for reaching a comprehensive agreement, and it is not yet clear whether Washington shares the objective of reopening the full agreement. Those are open questions, and I want to be careful not to present a stated goal as a settled outcome. The Prime Minister has also told the premiers to prepare for every scenario. The message conveyed from Charlottetown is that all options remain on the table, and that could include additional retaliatory measures roughly a month from now if talks do not progress. Again, that is a statement of readiness rather than a commitment. No package has been announced, no list of targeted goods has been released, and no date has been fixed. What has been established is that the federal government is not ruling escalation out. There is an important gap in what is publicly known, and I want to be direct about it. The specific content of the new tariff measures announced by the White House on Monday, including exactly which goods are covered and at what rates, was not detailed in the information available to me. Canadian officials have described these as new threats and have responded accordingly, but the operational details, effective dates, and any exemptions have not been set out here.
Leurs relations commerciales à l'échelle du monde, y compris le Canada et le Mexique. Je viens de discuter avec Monsieur le Président.
That matters because the economic impact of a tariff depends almost entirely on those specifics. Until they are confirmed, any estimate of the damage would be guesswork. What we can describe with confidence is the existing landscape. The earlier American tariffs, which Canadian officials have characterized as illegal, applied to Canadian steel, aluminum, automobiles, and softwood lumber. Those are foundational sectors: steel and aluminum feed manufacturing across Ontario and Quebec. The automotive sector operates as a single integrated cross-border industry, with components crossing repeatedly before a finished vehicle emerges. Softwood lumber ties directly to construction on both sides of the border and has been the subject of trade disputes for decades. Workers in those industries have been living with this uncertainty for more than a year. For ordinary consumers, the effects run in both directions. Canadians shopping at provincial liquor stores have already lost access to American products, and that has not changed. American producers who relied on Canadian provincial buyers have lost a substantial and reliable market. If tariffs expand, the cost pressure typically appears in the price of goods, in delayed purchasing decisions by businesses, and in slower hiring in exposed sectors. Whether that occurs, and to what degree, depends on the final scope of the measures and on how long they remain in place. I will not put numbers on it, because the numbers are not yet available. Now, the tariff file dominated the opening of this meeting, but it is not the only thing on the table in Charlottetown, and some of the other items carry serious weight. Wildfires are burning in multiple parts of the country, and premiers are examining whether Canada needs a coordinated national wildfire strategy. One idea under discussion is whether the federal government should acquire its own fleet of water bombers that could be deployed wherever the need is greatest in a given season.
D'une lotion à l'autre, se sont unis. Les gouvernements, les travailleurs, les syndicats, les commerces et surtout les...
The appeal is obvious. Fire seasons do not respect provincial boundaries, and equipment sitting idle in one province may be urgently needed in another. There is no consensus on that idea. Premier Eby of British Columbia raised a jurisdictional concern last week, noting that his province has invested significantly in new firefighting equipment and in firefighting research. His argument is that British Columbia is not looking to hand that capacity over to federal authorities, though he indicated the province is willing to assist others. That is a familiar pattern in Canadian federalism. The question is rarely whether coordination is useful. It is who directs the assets, who pays for them, and who is accountable when the response falls short. Premiers are expected to continue working through that question during their meetings. Interprovincial trade is also on the agenda, and it has taken on new significance precisely because of the American dispute. When access to the American market becomes less predictable, the barriers that Canadian provinces maintain against each other look harder to justify. Those barriers include differing regulations, licensing rules, and standards that make it more expensive to sell goods across a provincial line than it sometimes is to sell them internationally. Premiers set aside most of one day to work through those issues among themselves, without the Prime Minister in the room. Healthcare funding is the other perennial item, and I would not expect it to be resolved here. At essentially every First Minister's meeting in Canadian history, premiers have argued that federal transfers are insufficient to deliver the services provinces are responsible for providing. That argument is being made again. It is a structural disagreement about how a federation splits revenue and responsibility, and it does not typically produce a breakthrough at a two-day summit. There is a further issue hanging over this gathering that deserves attention. Canada may be approaching a renewed national unity debate. A referendum is expected in Alberta. Separately, an election is coming in Quebec, where the Sovereigntist Party is currently leading in polling and could form a government with the stated intention of holding another referendum on Quebec's future. Neither outcome is determined. Polling leads do not guarantee election results, and referendum questions and timing have not been finalized. But premiers are aware that a unity conversation could return to the national agenda while the country is simultaneously managing a trade dispute and a difficult wildfire season. That combination is part of why this meeting matters more than a typical summer gathering of First Ministers. The premiers also met with Indigenous leaders during the first day of talks. Carney traveled to Prince Edward Island following the virtual session, with a dinner planned at a National Historic Site on the northern part of the island, and a further round of meetings scheduled with the premiers the following day. Those closing sessions are where any attempt to align positions across provinces would need to happen. So what should you watch for?
In terms of other consumption habits, if I can put it that way, of Canadians, where Canadians have traveled. Other things that are on the shelves but aren't being purchased.
I would point to three things. The first is whether any province moves on the alcohol bans, and Alberta and Saskatchewan are the ones already outside that measure. The second is whether the federal government begins to specify what a retaliatory response would actually contain, because a described option and a published list are very different levels of commitment. The third is whether there is any indication that Washington is prepared to engage on a comprehensive renegotiation of CUSMA rather than narrower arrangements. Without that, the Canadian position and the American approach remain fundamentally misaligned. Let me be clear about what has and has not been established. It is confirmed that new tariff threats were announced by the White House on Monday, that most provinces continue to keep American alcohol off their shelves, that Ontario and British Columbia have publicly ruled out reversing that decision, that Alberta and Saskatchewan continue to sell American products and favor negotiation, and that the Prime Minister has declined to order any province to change course while rejecting sectoral deals in favor of a comprehensive agreement. What is not confirmed is whether further Canadian retaliation will occur, what it would target, whether talks will produce an agreement within the coming month, or what the full economic impact of the new measures will be. The central development here is not really about whiskey and wine. Those bottles are a visible marker of a much larger question about how Canada positions itself in a trade relationship that has become considerably less predictable. The premiers have signaled they are not preparing to concede as a gesture. The Prime Minister has signaled he wants a complete agreement rather than a partial one, and has kept the pressure measures where they are. Washington's next move, and whether serious negotiations begin before the informal 30-day marker passes, will determine which of these positions is tested first. Thank you for watching my report on the Charlottetown meetings between Prime Minister Mark Carney, Canada's premiers, and the response to the latest American tariff threats. This story is still developing, and the coming weeks should reveal whether negotiations advance or whether Canada moves toward a further response. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you receive the verified updates as decisions are made on tariffs, the provincial liquor bans, and the future of the Canada-United States trade relationship.